What if I told you that the Kansas City Chiefs, a team that just won back-to-back Super Bowls, a team that already has Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and a roster full of elite talent, what if I told you they might be about to add one of the most dangerous wide receivers in the entire NFL? We're talking about Stefon Diggs. And before you say, wait, didn't he just go through all that drama in Buffalo? Yes, he did. And that's exactly why this story is so much more interesting than it looks on the surface. Because this isn't just about a wide receiver switching teams. This is about a player who, at one point, was considered one of the top 3 receivers in the entire league. A guy who had back-to-back 100-catch seasons, now sitting in a very uncertain place in his career. And the Chiefs are apparently circling. So here's the question that's going to drive everything we talk about today. Would Stefon Diggs actually make the Chiefs unstoppable? Or is this a move that could blow up in everyone's face? Stick with me, because by the end of this, you're going to see why this rumor is bigger than most people realize. And why the NFL world is quietly, very quietly, watching to see what Kansas City does next. Let's go. Okay, so before we get into the Chiefs rumors and what the insiders are saying, we need to set the scene. We need to understand exactly who Stefon Diggs is right now, in June of 2026, and how he got to this point. Because to understand the rumor, you have to understand the man. And the story of Stefon Diggs over the last 2 years? It's one of the most dramatic falls from grace we've seen in recent NFL history. Cast your mind back to 2022. Stefon Diggs was elite. He was Josh Allen's right hand. He was the engine of the Buffalo Bills offense. He had just come off a 103-catch, 1,429-yard season. He was making the Pro Bowl. He was the guy that opposing defensive coordinators literally lost sleep over. The Bills were supposed to be Super Bowl contenders. Diggs was supposed to be the guy who finally helped Buffalo break that championship curse that's haunted the city for decades. And then, everything started to crack. The 2023 season in Buffalo got rocky. There were reports of frustration. There were rumors of tension between Diggs and the coaching staff. Whispers of a player who felt underutilized. A player who wanted the ball more. A player who, frankly, was getting harder and harder to manage behind the scenes. Now here's something most casual fans miss. When those reports first started leaking, the reports about Diggs being frustrated, Diggs having attitude issues, a lot of people dismissed it. They said, that's just noise. But the people inside NFL circles, the insiders, they knew something was different this time. And sure enough, in the spring of 2024, the Buffalo Bills shocked the football world. They traded Stefon Diggs to the Houston Texans. Just let that sink in for a second. The Bills traded their number 1 receiver. The guy who was supposed to be Josh Allen's partner in crime for the next 5 years. Gone. Just like that. And when the Bills made that move, the narrative shifted hard. Suddenly Diggs wasn't the beloved receiver trying to win a championship. He was a guy with baggage. A guy who wore out his welcome. A guy who teams might think twice about. But then, and this is where it gets really interesting, Diggs lands in Houston. He's playing with a young, dynamic quarterback in C.J. Stroud. The Texans are on the rise. This could be a fresh start, right? Except it wasn't. Diggs tears his ACL early in the 2024 season. Just like that, his entire year is over. His fresh start, gone. And now he's dealing with not just the career disruption, not just the team drama, but a major injury that puts his future in genuine question. So here we are in 2026. Stefon Diggs is healthy again. He's worked back from the ACL. He's ready to play football. But the Texans have moved on. And now, the question the entire NFL is asking is, where does Diggs land? Which brings us back to Kansas City. Now here's where things get spicy. And I want you to pay very close attention here, because this is the part where most of the reporting has been a little vague, and I want to break it down clearly. The rumor didn't come from thin air. NFL insiders, people who spend their entire careers with ears to the ground, people who have sources inside front offices, inside locker rooms, inside agent offices, these people started floating the idea that the Chiefs had at least explored the possibility of bringing in Stefon Diggs. Now let me be very clear about something. In the NFL rumor world, there's a huge difference between the Chiefs called his agent and the Chiefs are interested. And there's an even bigger difference between "there were conversations" and "a deal is imminent." What the insiders are saying right now falls somewhere in the middle. It's not a done deal. It's not even close to a done deal. But there is smoke. And in the NFL, where there's smoke, there's usually at least a small fire somewhere. The reporting suggests that Kansas City has been monitoring Diggs' situation. That they've done their homework on him, not just on his health and his ability to play, but on his mentality, his attitude, whether he's truly bought in, whether the drama that surrounded him in Buffalo was a two-way street or whether it was really a team culture problem more than a Diggs problem. And here's the thing, when you look at it from the Chiefs' perspective, this actually makes a ton of sense. Because Kansas City has a very specific problem right now that people aren't talking about enough. Let me explain the Chiefs' situation heading into the 2026 season. Patrick Mahomes is still Patrick Mahomes. He's still the greatest quarterback on the planet. He's still the guy who can make any receiver look elite. He's still the guy who pulls off throws that make you wonder if he's operating under different laws of physics than everyone else. But the weapons around Mahomes? That's where the conversation gets complicated. Travis Kelce, and this is a tough thing to say because Kelce is a legend, but Travis Kelce is not the same player he was 3 years ago. Father Time is undefeated. Kelce is still a dangerous weapon, still one of the smartest route runners in football, still a matchup nightmare in certain situations. But the explosiveness, the ability to just take over a game the way he used to, that's not quite the same anymore. And at wide receiver, the Chiefs have been piecing things together. They've had guys who are solid, guys who fit the system. But that genuine number one threat, that receiver who demands double teams, who an opposing defense has to scheme around specifically, they haven't had that in a while. Think about what Mahomes could do with a true WR1. Think about what he could do with a guy who runs crisp routes, who has great hands, who knows how to create separation, who has been in big games and hasn't blinked. And that description, that's Stefon Diggs when he's right. That's exactly who Stefon Diggs is when everything is clicking. So on paper, just purely on paper, Diggs to the Chiefs makes a frightening amount of sense. But here's the flip side. And I think this is the part that nobody wants to say out loud, but we have to talk about it. Stefon Diggs comes with risk. Real risk. Not the kind of risk you brush off. The kind that front offices lose sleep over. First, the injury. The ACL tear is no joke. Even for elite athletes in peak shape, coming back from an ACL takes time. It takes not just physical recovery, but mental recovery. There's something that happens to receivers after major knee injuries. Sometimes they come back and they're just as dangerous as they were before. Sometimes they come back and they're a step slower, a little more hesitant coming across the middle, a little less willing to go up for a contested catch. You don't know which version you're getting until the games actually start. Second, the fit question. And this might be the most important thing. The Kansas City Chiefs under Andy Reid and with Mahomes running the show, they have a very specific culture. They have a very specific way of doing things. Players who come in and try to do it their own way, try to force their own role, who prioritize stats over winning, those players don't last in Kansas City. They get eaten alive. The Chiefs have let talented players walk, players who had more raw talent than what they replaced them with, because those players didn't fit. Because Kansas City values the team above everything. Above stats. Above personalities. Above anything. So the question isn't just, can Diggs play? The question is, can Diggs play the Kansas City way? And that question, my friend, is the entire thing. That is the whole ballgame. Let me paint a picture for you. Let's say the Chiefs sign Diggs. Training camp opens. Diggs is there. He's healthy, he's motivated, he's got something to prove after everything he's been through. Day one of practice, and you can actually imagine this. Patrick Mahomes walks up to him, gives him that big grin, and says something like, "Let's go to work." And the energy is electric. Because Mahomes makes everyone around him better. That's just what he does. Now imagine week 1 of the regular season. The Chiefs come out with Diggs split wide. The defense has to account for him. That opens up the middle for Kelce. That creates space for the running backs. That gives Mahomes a clear-out route when everything else breaks down. Suddenly, the Chiefs' offense, which was already one of the best in football, now has a new dimension. Now has a piece that opponents have to specifically game plan for. Now has the kind of threat that can turn a 17-point game into a 35-point game in 2 possessions. That's the best-case scenario. That's the dream version of this. But now let's talk about the nightmare version. Diggs comes in. He's healthy. He's working hard. But the system feels different to him. The routes are different. The timing is different. In Buffalo, he had years with Josh Allen to develop that chemistry, that shorthand, that invisible language that elite quarterback-receiver duos develop. In Kansas City, he's starting from scratch with Mahomes, and even though Mahomes is better, chemistry takes time. And maybe Diggs gets frustrated. Maybe the targets aren't where he expects them. Maybe he has a couple of games where he feels like he's open and Mahomes goes somewhere else, because Mahomes always goes where the best play is, not where the receiver expects the ball. And maybe that frustration starts to bubble up. Maybe it becomes a thing. That's the nightmare. Not because Diggs is a bad person. Not because Mahomes is a bad teammate. But because the NFL is complicated, relationships are complicated, and adding a player with Diggs' history into any equation adds a level of unpredictability that most teams aren't willing to gamble on. The Chiefs aren't most teams. But they're still human. Now let's zoom out for a second. Because the Diggs conversation doesn't exist in isolation. There's a bigger picture here that I think is really important. The NFC is loaded. The AFC is loaded. And the Chiefs, while they are still the defending champions and the favorites in most people's minds, they are not operating in a vacuum. You've got teams that have gotten better. You've got teams that have specifically built their rosters with the Chiefs in mind, because when you win back-to-back Super Bowls, every single team in the league is essentially designing their roster to beat you. The Chiefs know this. Brett Veach, Kansas City's general manager, is one of the smartest minds in the entire NFL. This is the guy who has made bold moves when everyone expected him to play it safe, and has played it safe when everyone expected him to be bold. He doesn't react. He calculates. And the fact that Kansas City is even looking at Stefon Diggs tells you something. It tells you that Veach sees something on that roster that he wants to address. It tells you that maybe they're not fully satisfied with the receiving core as it stands. It tells you that the front office, despite all the success, despite all the rings, is still hungry. Still looking for that edge. Because that's what champions do. They don't sit on what they have. They look for what they could have. Let me stop here for a second because I want to address something that I know some of you are thinking right now. Doesn't Mahomes make everyone around him elite? Doesn't he just make it work regardless of who's catching passes? And look, that's a fair point. Mahomes is not a regular quarterback. He makes receivers look better than they are. He makes plays out of nothing. He extends drives with his legs when the pocket collapses. He's the most valuable player in football, and that's not even a debate anymore. But here's the thing, and this is subtle but really important. There's a difference between Mahomes making role players look good and Mahomes having a genuine number one receiver who forces defenses to completely change their approach. When you have a true WR1, a guy who is a legitimate receiving threat on every single play, defenses have to account for him specifically. They have to dedicate resources to him. A safety over the top. A corner who can actually run. That commitment creates space everywhere else. When you don't have that guy, when your best receiver is a solid number 2 but not a number 1, defenses can cheat. They can put that extra resource somewhere else. They can double Kelce more. They can send an extra rusher because they're not worried about getting torched by a single receiver. Diggs at his best is the kind of player who changes defensive game plans. Who makes coordinators say, we have to account for him specifically. That's rare. That's genuinely rare in this league. And the Chiefs right now don't quite have that. If they add Diggs, the healthy, hungry, fully locked-in version of Diggs, they have it. Here's another angle that most people aren't considering. Think about what this does to Travis Kelce. Kelce is still one of the best tight ends in football. But as defenses have adjusted, they've started putting more resources specifically on Kelce because he's been the most dangerous weapon in the Kansas City arsenal. Extra safety help over the top. Linebackers who are specifically in the game because of Kelce. The moment you put Diggs on the field opposite that, the moment you give defenses 2 genuine threats to worry about, everything opens up. Kelce gets more one-on-one coverage, more room to work, more space after the catch. It's like what happens in basketball when a team gets a legitimate stretch four. Suddenly the paint opens up for everyone because the defense has to respect the shooter on the perimeter. Diggs could be Kansas City's version of that. The weapon that makes every other weapon better by simply being on the field. That's a powerful concept, and I think it's one that Brett Veach has thought about very carefully. Now I want to talk about what Diggs would bring as a person. Not just as a player, but as a person who has been through things. Because the journey Stefon Diggs has been on, the drama in Buffalo, the trade, the new start in Houston, the injury, the comeback, that either breaks a player or it builds them into something tougher. Something more focused. Something more grateful for the game. The reports that have come out about Diggs in his recovery, the way he approached the rehab, the mindset he's had coming back, they're genuinely encouraging. People who have been around him talk about a player who seems like he has a chip on his shoulder. Who feels like he has something to prove. And in Kansas City, in a system that demands accountability, that demands unselfishness, that demands you buy into the team above everything, a player with a chip on his shoulder who is willing to prove himself can be absolutely lethal. Think about some of the players who have come to the Chiefs in recent years with something to prove. Players who maybe didn't fit perfectly somewhere else. Players who came to Kansas City and suddenly looked like completely different, better players. The Chiefs have a unique ability to take players who need a reset and make them whole again. Not always. Not every time. But often enough that you have to respect the process. So the question is Diggs ready for that? Is he ready to be humbled enough to buy in completely? Is he ready to be Stefon Diggs of the Kansas City Chiefs instead of Stefon Diggs the star? Because in Kansas City, the system is the star. And the players who accept that, they win rings. Let's talk about the money for a second. Because in the NFL, nothing happens without the money making sense. Diggs, at this point in his career, is not going to command the top-of-market contract he would have gotten 3 or 4 years ago. The injury, the age, the uncertainty, all of that depresses his market value from where it once was. But that also means that the Chiefs, who are always conscious of cap space, always thinking 3 moves ahead financially, could potentially get Diggs at a price point that actually works for them. Now I want to be careful here because I don't have specific numbers to throw at you. Contracts in the NFL are always in flux, and the details of what Kansas City would actually offer Diggs are something that only the people inside that building truly know. But the general principle is this: Diggs is not going to get a Tyreek Hill money deal. He's not going to get paid like a young, elite receiver in his prime. Which means a team like Kansas City, a team that is trying to maximize their championship window, can potentially add a player of Diggs' caliber without completely blowing up their cap situation. And that, right there, is what makes this rumor genuinely realistic. It's not just a fantasy. It's not just, wouldn't it be cool if Diggs and Mahomes played together? There's actually a scenario, a real, honest-to-goodness scenario, where the finances work. Okay. I need to take you somewhere specific right now. I need you to think about a moment. It's November. It's a Sunday night. The lights are on. The stadium is electric. Kansas City is hosting one of the NFC's top teams in a game that everyone already knows could be a Super Bowl preview. The Chiefs line up. Mahomes is behind center. And out wide, split to the right, lined up against their best cornerback, is number 14. Stefon Diggs. The corner is talking. Maybe a little trash talk. Trying to get in Diggs' head. And Diggs just looks at him. That quiet, cold stare that elite receivers have. That look that says, I've been through things you don't even know about. You don't shake me. The ball snaps. Diggs runs a comeback route. Sharp, crisp, the way he's always run routes, even after the ACL, even after everything. The corner bites inside. Diggs comes back to the ball. Mahomes delivers it, that precise, perfect throw to the back shoulder that only Mahomes can make, and Diggs hauls it in. 34 yards. First down. Chiefs ball in the red zone. The crowd erupts. And in that moment, in that single play, everything that seemed uncertain about Diggs, everything that seemed risky, everything that made people question whether this was a good idea, all of it evaporates. Because football has a way of answering questions that conversations can't. That's the moment the Chiefs are chasing. That's what Brett Veach is trying to build. That's what this rumor is really about. Here's something I want to address directly. Some of you watching this might be Bills fans. Some of you might be Texans fans. And some of you might have a very specific reaction to hearing Stefon Diggs, Kansas City Chiefs, that goes something like, absolutely not, no way, don't do it, this is a mistake. And I hear you. I genuinely hear you. If you watched Diggs in Buffalo at his peak, if you watched him torch defenses week after week, if you watched him and Josh Allen build one of the most exciting quarterback receiver connections in recent memory, and then watched it fall apart the way it did, yeah, that leaves a mark. And if you're a Texans fan who watched Diggs come in on a fresh start and then go down with a major injury before he could even prove himself, yeah, that's a specific kind of NFL heartbreak. But here's what I want you to consider. Diggs' story isn't over. Not even close. The NFL is full of players who had difficult chapters and then wrote incredible final acts. Players who got lost in one place and found themselves in another. Players who needed a specific situation, a specific coach, a specific quarterback to unlock the version of themselves that everyone always believed was in there. Mahomes and Andy Reid might be exactly that situation for Diggs. Not because Diggs is broken, but because sometimes the right fit changes everything. Let me give you a little historical context here. Because this isn't the first time the Chiefs have pursued a wide receiver with complicated history. Brett Veach and Andy Reid have a pattern. They're not afraid of players who have had drama elsewhere. They're not scared off by a narrative. What they care about, what they obsessively evaluate, is whether the player's issues were about the player himself or about the situation. Because if a player had problems in one situation but those problems are tied to a specific environment, a specific coaching staff, a specific system, a specific dynamic with teammates or management, then those problems don't automatically travel with the player. They can be left behind. The Chiefs believe, and they have the track record to back this up, that their culture is strong enough to absorb a player with baggage and redirect that energy into something positive. Not every team can say that. In fact, most teams can't say that. But Kansas City has earned the right to believe in their process. So when you hear, the Chiefs are interested in Stefon Diggs, don't hear it as, the Chiefs are making a desperate move. Hear it as, the Chiefs are considering whether Diggs fits their specific model for adding a complicated player to an elite team culture. That's a very different thing. And it's a much more nuanced story. Now let's talk about what Diggs would have to do, personally, professionally, mentally, to make this work. First, he would have to completely relinquish any ego about his role. In Kansas City, there is no room for a receiver who is tracking his stats, who is upset about target share, who is looking at his contract situation and feeling like he needs a big year to set up his next deal. That mentality gets you run out of Kansas City faster than anything. What Diggs would need to do is come in and say, and genuinely mean it, I am here to win. Whatever that looks like. Whatever route they want me to run, wherever they need me to line up, however many targets I get, I am here to win. If Diggs can do that, if he can truly embrace that mindset, then the Chiefs are going to love him. Because he brings skills that they don't currently have. He brings an ability to beat press coverage. He brings crisp route running. He brings the kind of contested catchability that is genuinely rare. But if even a sliver of the old frustration comes back, if even one bad week leads to sideline body language, leads to a post-game comment that gets taken out of context, leads to a source close to Diggs' quote in some reporter's notebook, then the whole thing unravels. Fast. That's the knife's edge that this potential partnership lives on. Andy Reid. Let's talk about Andy Reid for a second, because I think he's actually the most important factor in this entire conversation. Andy Reid is a receiver whisperer. He has taken wide receivers who were considered problems, who were considered uncoachable, difficult, too much to handle, and turned them into productive, happy, excellent players. His track record with skill position players is arguably the best in NFL history. Part of it is scheme. Reid runs one of the most sophisticated, receiver-friendly offenses in football. The routes make sense. The spacing is perfect. Players don't have to do impossible things. They run routes that put them in positions to succeed, and then the quarterback, the greatest quarterback in football, delivers the ball precisely. Part of it is also relationship. Reid is not a screamer. He's not a dictator. He has a grandfatherly quality, a warmth that players genuinely respond to. He's demanding, absolutely, but demanding in the way a great mentor is demanding. He pushes you because he believes in you. He corrects you because he knows you can be better. For a player like Diggs, who has had friction with coaching staffs, Andy Reid might be exactly the right human being to work with. Reid isn't going to embarrass Diggs in front of his teammates. He's not going to undermine him publicly. He's going to give him a role, believe in him to execute that role, and then get out of the way and let the player be great. That matters. That matters a lot. I want to take you on a slight detour here. Just for a moment. Because I think there's a version of this story that nobody is fully telling yet, and it's the most interesting version. What if the Diggs interest from Kansas City isn't just about Diggs? What if it's a signal? What if the Chiefs shopping for a wide receiver of Diggs' caliber is telling us something about how they see the landscape heading into 2026? What if it means that internally, in those meetings that happen behind closed doors, in the conversations between Mahomes and Veach, in the film sessions where coaches break down what opponents are doing against them, what if internally, Kansas City has decided that they need to upgrade at receiver more aggressively than the public realizes? Because teams don't usually pursue a player of Diggs' profile unless there's a genuine need. They don't create that kind of noise unless they're actually in the market. So the Diggs rumor might be the headline. But the real story might be, the Chiefs believe they have a receiver problem. And they're serious about fixing it. That's the bigger story. And that's the story that opposing teams in the AFC should be very, very concerned about. Because if the Chiefs are serious, if they add Diggs or someone like Diggs before the season starts, the AFC is in serious trouble. Let me bring it home now. Let me tell you what I actually think. Not as a reporter, not as someone just presenting rumors, but as someone who has watched this league, who has studied this team, who has followed this story carefully. I think the Chiefs pursue Diggs. I think the conversations are real. I think there's genuine interest on both sides. I think Diggs wants this. I think after everything he's been through, after Buffalo, after Houston, after the injury, I think Diggs wants to be somewhere where he can win. Where he can compete for a Super Bowl. Where he can close out this chapter of his career with a ring instead of a question mark. And I think the Chiefs want a receiver. They've wanted a genuine wide receiver threat for 2 or 3 years. They've tried to build it through the draft. They've tried to build it through smaller free agent signings. And they haven't quite gotten there. Diggs, healthy, motivated, and bought in, Diggs could be the answer. Now, does the deal actually happen? That's the part one genuinely don't know. Because the NFL is unpredictable. Because negotiations fall apart. Because other teams get involved. Because sometimes the money doesn't work. Because sometimes the player wants something the team can't give. But the interest is real. The fit makes sense. And in a league where the window for winning championships can close faster than you ever expect, Kansas City knows this better than anyone. You don't sit on an opportunity like this without at least seeing where it leads. Here's the final thing I want to leave you with. Championships are won in moments that nobody sees coming. They're won by moves that seem risky until they work. They're won by conversations that start in rumor and end in rings. The Chiefs have been here before. They've taken chances that looked questionable from the outside. They've built a dynasty not by playing it safe, but by making bold decisions with smart information behind them. Stefon Diggs is a bold decision. There's no other way to describe it. But bold decisions are what separate good teams from great ones. And in Kansas City, with Patrick Mahomes under center, with Andy Reid on the sideline, with Brett Veach making the calls, bold decisions have a funny way of working out. So watch this space. Watch this story very carefully. Because it might just be the move that sets up Kansas City's next championship run. It might just be the decision that keeps the dynasty going. It might just be the moment that the entire football world looks back on and says, yeah, that's when we knew. Stefon Diggs. Patrick Mahomes. Kansas City Chiefs. Say it out loud. Let it sit for a second. Yeah, I know. It sounds pretty dangerous to me too.